OK. Man hollowed out false leg to smuggle iguanas.
Then, as I was idly surfing the internet, I came across one story which intrigued me.
And false legs used to smuggle drugs.
Now, it seemed like a long shot, but given that 400 legs had been carefully concealed below a floor, one worth investigating. I made contact with Bob Gauger from Revenue and Customs, who spent 20 years on the front line.
You'd actually be quite surprised how often this sort of thread runs through drug smuggling stories. I mean, the one that comes to mind is one that I was involved in, where a 59-year-old Jamaican man arrived at Gatwick Airport off a flight from Jamaica. The sniffer dog was scanning and checking passengers as they walked along the corridors. The dog showed quite an interest in this particular gentleman, and when they carried out a search of his artificial leg, they found about just under a kilo of cocaine, and I guess the street value was in the region of about £65,000.
Bob, we've come across this case of a fair number of legs found in a basement. Would that arouse your suspicions at all?
That sounds as if they were being used for smuggling drugs. Then
it's a major cartel, isn't it?
It's probably several major cartels, I would think, yeah. I mean, to have that number of couriers sort of crossing the Atlantic with cocaine in them, it's probably unlikely that they would have been used, but never say never.
So my first two theories had bitten the dust. There was no black market in limbs, and the smuggling idea seemed pretty implausible. Maybe I'd made the classic conspiracy theorist's mistake of looking for sinister motives, where I should be looking for something a bit more charitable.
OK, so disability, charities, right.
I wondered if it might have been possible that someone had somehow collected these for reuse of some kind. Did that kind of charity exist?
Disability charity Christmas cards. That's not... OK, here's one. Power International started in 1995 in order to care for those disabled by landmines. Power improves the quality of services on offer, including artificial limbs.
I met up with Sarah Hodge of Power International. If someone offered her 400 second-hand prosthetics, surely she wouldn't say no.
We would say no, because we get telephone calls to say, my husband's died and I've got these old prostheses of his, would you like them? And unfortunately, thank you, but no thank you, because apart from the shipping cost, the most expensive component is time in making a good socket fit.
Right.
So the rest of it is quite a cheap thing.
How often do people make those sorts of phone calls, were they?
Well, not necessarily even one a year. I might get a call, occasionally means once every 2 years.
Have you come across anything like this before?
No.
You haven't?
No, it's a really strange story.
You mean you've never heard of 400 false legs under a house?
No.
It sounds like you would remember. If the phone rang and someone said, I've got 400,
yes.
You'd remember.
I certainly would.
So it seemed there was a hung jury on the charity angle. It was time to give Robin Cooper a call to see if he'd got any leads from the photos I'd taken in Luton. Hi, is that Robin?
It is.
Hi, Robin, it's Steve. Did you get a chance to look at those photos that we took?
Yes, I did. Yes, I looked at them. Very interesting.
What sort of dates do you think you'd be looking at from what you've seen?
Well, most of the limbs seem to date from the late 60s to the middle 80s, principally from a company called Hanger.
Right, because I was following up with an idea that you suggested when we met about the war. And
yes, I think these are later than that.
So what do you think I should do next, Robin?
If you were going to Roehampton, they still have a manufacturing centre for this type of metal socket. So with the aid of the photographs that you have, it might well be worth asking the people there, especially the very experienced people, whether they can tell you any more.
So now the war angle was dead. There was only one thing for it. Get down to Roehampton, sharpish.
We manufacture upper limbs, lower limbs.
I'd managed to track down Stan East, who started at Roehampton in 1967 and had worked for Hanger, the company who'd made many of the legs I'd seen. I showed him the photos.
My goodness, there they all are. That's the story of them.
That's a lot of them, yeah.
That's amazing. I was just surprised. Yeah, I didn't realise it was that many. That someone could add that many things under there. It was in their floor space, wasn't it? In the cellar. Yeah.
Many of these limbs were made by Hanger. You used to work for Hanger yourself, is that right?
Yeah. All those legs would have been made here. That's the number one true hit. Let's have a look at that one. That's a rocker. My goodness, that's an old one. Very rare now, we still make a few. My goodness, someone's been collecting these for quite some time. Now looking at these legs, they are legs that are ready to be disposed of, either because the patient's not here anymore, or doesn't use it anymore, or it's not serviceable anymore. And they return them to us. Then what we do is here, we put them into a store, and then we eventually end up giving them, I mean, a lot of them went to Kosovo and places like that.
Yes.
And they go out there with charity.
So at last I was onto something. The charity angle did stand up.
Someone really has got a haul of stuff here to go away somewhere. No doubt about that.
Because what we've been hearing is that it's not... the main cost and the main difficulty is finding the technicians in these countries rather than the actual limbs.
When people have taken stuff over to countries where they have no prosthetic service, people over there, the amputees, will make use of everything.
Really?
Yeah. Everything. That's phenomenal.
Really?
They're the reports I get back from the people that have taken them over there. They certainly don't get thrown into a corner like this is showing in here, not get used.
So it was looking likely that the legs had indeed been collected for charity. I was still waiting to speak to the previous owner of the house. But what of the present owners, the Suttons, the lucky beneficiaries of the stash? What do you do if you buy a house and find hundreds of false limbs under the floor? The answer is you have to try surprisingly hard to get rid of them. For the Suttons, it proved far from easy. Artificial legs don't just walk out by themselves.
I phoned all sorts of places. And that went on for ages, didn't it? I phoned Dorchester Hospital, and the lady that answered really did make me extremely cross because she did not believe me. And it was almost a pat on the head saying, there, keep taking the pills, not quite, but and I got really cross. She suggested I phoned our local hospital here, which I did. And she said, do you drive? I said, yes. Could you put the legs in the car and bring them up and I'll have a look at them? And I said, there are 400. And she went, right, I'll get back to you. And guess what? That was the end of that one. She probably thought I'd been at the bottle or something. I don't know what she...
Did you phone the council?
I mean, we didn't really want to chuck them away, and even if we'd been able to, I mean, there's no way I wanted to sort of collect them all in a van and take them down to the dump, because I sort of felt that they had to have some use. I thought somebody would be grateful for these rather than just chucking them away. I mean, it'd be almost a crime to chuck them away, really.
Help finally arrived thanks to Ray Edwards of the British Limbless Association, who are based at Roehampton Hospital.
It's very odd to be requested to go and pick up that amount of limbs. It became a bit macabre. And I must tell you, when we said to Mrs Sutton, would you like one? She said, get rid of them completely. Yeah. It's quite a fright laying on top of 300 limbs.
So how did the Limbless Association then get itself involved with this?
From my point of view, as a limb wearer myself and a quad amputee since 1987, you like to think that your limbs are reused. It'd be a waste to go to a skip and put on a tip. And now we hope to ship them out to Pakistan to help the earthquake victims and limb loss community there. It's like a donor, isn't it? Giving some part of the body back to someone else.
I think when I actually saw these legs all together in a shed, it suddenly became very obvious that there's an individual life behind every one of them. Does that sort of feel important to you?
Every limb has a story to tell. So if you found my limbs, which are 2 legs, 2 arms, you'd wonder, how the hell did that guy get on? And I think, from my point of view, it was a hellish trip. When it all happened, I was on so many drugs to save my life, they had to amputate them. As soon as you come out of that, you realise you're in a new world because you become a teddy bear. No hands, no feet. And as a builder, you think, I've lost my independence, I can't do anything. I was in this unit called the Douglas Barder unit, where there was amputees there rehabilitating themselves, but they'd only lost one limb, and of course here am I won the jackpot, 4 limbs gone. It was just, how the hell am I going to live like this? There are days where you really go down and low, and I think from my point of view, 21 years on, I can accept that more, but it's taken all that time to understand what my disability is all about. So we all have to visualise every limb that we found has a personal story.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get into the mind of the person who got them. I'd love to understand it. If we could find the person and ask why, then that would close the book, really, wouldn't it?
And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I'd finally got hold of the number of the previous owner of the house, a Dave Park, who's now living in Portugal. It was time to give him a call and find out the real reason how and why the limbs had found their way under the floorboards of the Suttons' home.
Hi, is that Dave? Hi, it's Steve Punt here from the BBC.
You can't hear Dave's replies because he didn't want to be recorded. He told us he'd only give one interview and he'd already given it exclusively to the Gridport News. But he did give me his side of the story. He'd collected the limbs for a charity to send to Africa. This was about 25 years ago. He told me it had all ended when the airline refused to send any more because of the weight. But there was one last thing bothering me.
One question for you. Why were the legs under the floorboards?
Well, It was, apparently, the most convenient place. But out of sight, out of mind, and when it came to selling his house, Mr. Park forgot about the hundreds of artificial legs under his bathroom. How can you forget about 400 prosthetics? Did he never think, as he ran a nice hot bath, of the legs that lay beneath? Those questions, like a phone call to a computer helpline, will probably never be answered.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
And it turned out Dave hadn't been acting alone. He said he'd done it all at the behest of a missionary called Reverend Derek Joy.
Joy. British-born Nigerian who grew up in Gridport. Reverend Joy studied at Oxford and Cambridge and then became a school principal and missionary in Nigeria, and he died just last year.
He seems to have been a workaholic and charismatic character, as he would have to have been, to make his British limb-gathering operation so remarkably fruitful. It was case closed, and though the legs never made it to Africa, the Suttons were happy that they would at last find a use in Pakistan. But what did they think of Mr. Park's explanation?
He was very forgetful, shall we say. I was actually hoping we were going to win the lottery, because I said the first thing I'm going to do if I win the lottery is these are all going to be shipped out to him just for a laugh. But unfortunately I didn't win the lottery, so that didn't happen.
We've had this dragging over 6 months now, and I'm just glad it's all over with.
At no point when people were phoning you up, did anybody at any point say something like that happened to us?
No.
Well, no, I mean, it says...
No.
No, I guess it's fairly rare, to be honest. They're gone and I'm happy.
Yes, all's well that ends well, and I think that's probably how I feel about it. And relieved that they've gone.